Hello and welcome. We return once more to World Building Wednesday, of course. Today we will actually get into the world building, more so than usual, as we try to get back on track. Unfortunately, as I think I stated before, we had a few errors, well, not really, sort of mechanical difficulties in regards to our ship's heating. Luckily, well, radiating more so than heating. Luckily, that was solved for the most part. And here we are once more. Of course, as usual, I am Lord Casimir Basilius, here to bring you the world of Galactic Requiem. Well, universe more so than world, but So, it is of course World Building Wednesday, and we will focus on world building. We will of course be world building the frontier sector here. Technically, the sector we're working on is not directly related to our solo character, Juliana Aldous, who lives in the Terran nations, of course. For those of you who don't know where that is, we'll just go over to here. The Terran nations, where our solo campaign character is here. Specifically, I believe she's somewhere here. Well, the frontier sector known as Sacred Grove is here. This one. Distance-wise, we've been over this many times, so I'll just be real quick here. Every square here is 150 light years. Every one of these smaller squares. And it takes about an hour, I believe. Yes, it takes about an hour to travel a light year with a standard FTL drive. So, given that each one of those is 150 light years, you can see distance-wise, we are rather far away. Most of civilized space is literally up here. And in order to get down there, there is a gate somewhere over here that connects directly to Sacred Grove. Specifically, there's a gate in the capital that connects those two areas. In a way, we'll be world building the Sacred Grove sector and the Deep Frontier, just because it gives us more options. Of course, we're not limited to this. We will, theoretically, over time, we'll build all sorts of things. But I thought, for ease of working on things, without too many pre-existing connections, we will work on the Sacred Grove sector for now. Of course, on Miscellaneous Friday, we will run the solo campaign unless something comes up, but hopefully we've solved all the problems, so nothing should come up. So theoretically, we'll work on that on the solo campaign. We'll play the solo campaign on Friday. Anyway, let's get down to actual world building now. And less rambling, as I've said I'd do repeatedly. But look, we're already rambling, so let's get to it. This, of course, is Sacred Grove. We have some data on it, but there is so much that we can work on, so many connections to do, all that. And so let's do so. First, of course, we must state what's already there. Sacred Grove being a frontier sector, we know it connects to civilized space via a gate in this system. Not sure how much of that is actually visible, but here's some of the notes we have on it. Very, very brief side tangent. My apologies. Back in the day, lots of notes. I would put notes in the file. I'd split notes between separate files in this file. Now I try and put all of my notes in a separate file and not keep the notes on the map tools things. But that's just because of ease of searching for things and the like. Map tools is very useful for keeping notes. For instance, here is a list of what's in the system and like. And that can be very useful for, quick reference instead of having to look it up. But also when searching for notes, having notes specifically on the tokens can be difficult. So there's upsides and downsides, but nowadays we try and keep it in separate files. Anyway, that's not too relevant. Sometimes we take notes still and things. Anyway, that's enough of that side tangent. So basically, the gate from civilized space, well, the border of civilized space, leads here. This is the capital of Sacred Grove. The area, the system, is called Sacred Grove. The sector is also called Sacred Grove. The reason for this being the government that controls the area is called Sacred Grove. They're sort of the unified government that works in the Dyson swarm here. I believe there's multiple partial Dyson swarms. Or maybe there's just one. It's been a long time. I don't have my note. Yeah, there are a couple of partial and sparse half-constructed Dyson swarms in the center of this area. But there's one primary Dyson swarm. It's not unified. There's lots of separate nations going about their own things. And there are spheres of influence in this area, which is what these symbols represent. Basically, the spheres of influence. The inner systems, the second tier systems, which are sort of these. There's the inner second tier systems and the standard second tier systems. The third tier systems, I believe, and the outer systems. I would have to actively double check my notes on that. Like I said, I don't have them quite open, which does make it slightly difficult to be absolutely accurate in what I'm saying. Let's see whether I can quickly, without too much effort, find this. Okay, almost, sorry, just half a second longer. Assuming it actually loads or not, that's an option, I suppose. Okay, wrong file. Okay, here should be once more, my apologies. My organization of notes is not the best. It also does not help that I have so many files open with basically information on Galactic Requiem lore and the like. In order to run Galactic Requiem, I have a lot of files open. It is either this file or the other one. Okay. It just didn't open. That's fine. Okay. Apparently, the file is, there we are. Sorry about that. So, let's get down to work without further delay. So, one final check to make sure everything is working. It has been a few weeks. Okay, things do still appear to be working. So, let's get down to it. Sacred Grove being out here, of course we know of the inner systems being these systems, but we can always add more to them. The Frontier has some loose information to it, of course. Not all of it is noted in the same file, which is a problem. Unfortunately, like I said, my note-taking is bad. When you're world building, you're going to want good notes. You're going to want sorted and good notes that you can easily find. I suppose that's our first tip of the day of world building. Make sure your notes are sorted and easy to find. Ideally, don't split up your notes between several different files in regards to such things, because it'll make it real difficult. We will be working on perhaps a little bit of mapping of the outer areas, but I kind of want to work on the inner Sacred Grove systems. The way the Sacred Grove system and sector works is there is a loose core government in the Dyson Swarm. I say loose core government, they're a Dyson Swarm government, so they're rather large. The Dyson Swarm itself is not unified in any way. I know before we talked about how nations can have certain amounts of control over Dyson Swarms before chaos ensues. You can only control such a vast entity so much. The Sacred Grove Dyson Swarm is far more chaotic than a standard Dyson Swarm in a sense that it is barely unified. There's no overarching real government. There's sort of a unified alliance, but it's a Dyson Swarm, so they have so much resources. Even any small faction has so much resources that basically they control and extend their power not only to this sector, but to nearby sectors. Not several out, but very close nearby sectors they project their power out to. But they don't have direct control outside of their last sphere. This is considered their border, basically. They don't technically have control outside of it, but they definitely have influence even a sector out from each. Now, however, I don't think we've been over that here, but in our previous campaign with Eshadon, which you can see the token for here, it's unfortunately not been uploaded or anything, but we had a previous entire set of things. But Eshadon Candido Okoro was our previous solo character, and we learned that a system over here, I think we even have it marked, yeah, had interference from Sacred Grove. Specifically, there's interference all around. So it's basically they project their power outside of their own spheres of influence quite directly. It's not like they're known outside. They're known way many sectors out there known. There's not many large Dyson swarms out here in the Deep Frontier, especially not groupings of Dyson swarms. So they have a lot of power and prestige out there, but they do actually influence things outside of their outermost sphere of control. However, it's not like when we say they have control, as I said, they're a loose sort of alignment of forces that project their military force out at most to their border. Not military influence, more so political influence to the border directly. But that doesn't mean the outer systems out here and the like are tied to or follow the direct orders of Sacred Grove. It's more so, like I said, they're split. They're very, very split. So even if something is in the outer area, it doesn't mean it's directly following their decrees and so forth. Hell, things in their own system don't follow their own decrees. They're so split. But that doesn't mean they don't project force further out. So we're going to be working on Sacred Grove and the outer things in our world building. Of course, we will build everywhere over our series, but we'll focus quite a bit here for now, because it is sort of considered an important area. We'll also work on progressing overall campaign to a degree. When I say progressing overall campaign, I don't mean solo campaign. As I've said, I run this for quite a few people. Galactic Requiem is run for quite a few groups. And we often run nation scale things and personal scale things, character scale all the way up to nation scale, anywhere from running a small business to running an empire to firefights in the streets to wars to everything. It's all run. But basically, in order to simulate a living world, which is what Galactic Requiem is all about, sometimes, as the main primary GM of everything, I do progress certain things that aren't necessarily directly tied to players. For instance, no players. We both randomly generate events and decide events and so forth. But basically, for fairness sake and all that. But basically, how do I put it? No player group is currently part of the Sacred Grove government. There is, as far as I recall, now, I know that sounds a little bit weird to put it as far as I recall, no player groups are tied to the Sacred Grove government. I would like to point out, when running Galactic Requiem, I say I run for multiple groups. Yes, but also every one of the groups I run for has, over time, so many. When I say groups, I mean player groups, but every single player group that I run for over time has gained so many character groups. So, there's mercenaries here, mercenaries there, mercenaries there. There's nation runners there. I don't limit, well, we have campaigns and campaign arcs and the like, but it's not like they're limited to this thing. It's, we'll run a crime bank robbing campaign for a while. And then, if they succeed or fail or if they're at a good spot, we'll switch over to maybe some soldiers for several, sessions over there. We have arcs and so forth, but, we swap. It's not like, and, if they want, they can go back to those characters. It's a living world. So, genuinely, over all the years we've done this, it is hard to remember without going through, character files and this group is doing this group is doing that, this group is ties to this, knowing exactly what anybody is tied to directly. But to the best of my recollections, there are loose ties to certain people and factions in Sacred Grove. But there's also machinations and plans and plotting and so forth, and certain people tied to certain factions that are tied to things going on in Sacred Grove, but nobody's directly, you know, tied to the running of Sacred Grove. I know that much. When I say that, it's a bit more complex because, as I think I said, stations, and so forth are independent. Of course, I am loosely tied to Sacred Grove in a sense that my personal forces attempted to invade Sacred Grove, and we control a few stations in Sacred Grove in a foolish attempt to assault a Dyson swarm, which isn't going too well, admittedly. But that's just how it goes sometimes. Of course, there's a player group currently doing stuff in Sacred Grove. There's also, well, I think there's two. No, unimportant. I'm not going to waste your time counting how many player groups are there. There's two primarily connected to running things in Sacred Grove loosely tied to the political situation in Sacred Grove. Let's put it that way. Directly tied, as in has some sway in it. Of course, I'm not counting players whose nations might be tied to there, but aren't in any major way tied to the running. Anyway, all that's completely irrelevant. That's a side tangent. We're going to skip off that. Of course, there's also player groups doing stuff there that are in no way tied to the running of it. But I believe a few of them left Sacred Grove, the capital system, and are in area around. And anyway, here we are. So that's the problem with tangents. Sometimes you lose where you were. So there's something we need to progress in Sacred Grove overall wise that's been building to. It's more so a overarching political decision Sacred Grove needs to consider. Or basically have been considering, but, we need to consider what they're considering about it. Which is, over the last in-game couple of years, I'm trying to think of dates and the like. Yeah, it's been a few years. It's been a few in-game years. Because the current Galactic year, we're going to quickly pop on over to here. This should calculate it for us. Yeah, it's 7894. Current year's 7894. Well, yeah, for the last four abbreviated numbers. But basically, this started in, I believe, 788. I believe it started in 788, not 7880, but the end of the 788 year chain, or the early 789s. I forget the exact date that it started in. The heading into the sector and the like. But basically, recently, over the last few in-game years, more and more people and governments and groups have been heading into Sacred Grove. The question Sacred Grove needs to answer is, do they want to shift the gate? Can they shift the gate? I don't think they can shift the gate. Okay. Sorry, one more second. Yeah, they've already shifted the gate the most they can. There would be problems if they shifted it further. FTL is finicky. We're still working on the lore video for that. Unfortunately, we've been a bit busy here, but we're still working on the lore video for that. Basically, as I think we've explained a few times, FTL and the like, it requires routes, specifically the gate from where the gate from there to here, from not the gate to get to here from civilized space to Sacred Grove from civilized space is a special ancient jump gate. They can't really move it out of system. But so they've at best, well, before they've already moved it to the edge of the system. I was considering whether they might be able to move it somewhere else, but no, technically, due to the FTL rules, they wouldn't be able to move it anywhere distinctly out of system. So they're stuck with it in the capital, unless they want to close the gate, and they don't want that. Okay. A thing that is important in designing and world building is internal consistency. If you have rules and laws, it's not to say you can't break those rules and laws, but you must know and have good reason to break those rules and laws when world building. For instance, the rules and laws of FTL dictate how it works. There are certain things that are basically just assured to a degree. For instance, FTL lanes are required to transit safely. A non-FTL lane jump causes non-FTL lane transition causes problems. I have to be specific in that because jump is a type of FTL that is its own thing. Often I will just say jump, but that's wrong because it can get confusing. A jump is specifically jump space related, which has separate rules than normal FTL. You shift into FTL. It's a different realm, sort of, unless you're using warp, but that's we're not going to we're not going to get into that. We'd be here for a while. Like I said, we're already literally the first lore video is going to be about FTL. So I'm not going to go into depth explaining the differences between FTL types and all that. That's for the lore video. But needless to say, I say jump often when referring to FTL, but when referring to general FTL, I don't mean jump space shifts and so forth. But the gate here is a jump gate. Jump devices work different sometimes. It really depends on your tier. There's so many different types of FTL drive. I mean, I say that, it's a bit more complex than that. We're talking about FTL. So, subspace, slip space, hyperspace, other types of space. And then there's jump space and warp. It's not space, it's just warped space. You can put space at the end if you put a D at the end of warp. Warped space, of course, ED, but you know. Warped space, so basic types of space. There's different layers. We won't get into that, but in simple terms, the lanes you see here, the blue lines, FTL lanes, apply to warp, slip space, hyperspace, subspace. Sometimes, loosely, they apply to jump space, depending on the quality and tier of your jump space drive. If you have a good jump space drive, you don't need to worry about FTL lanes to a degree. I would if I were you, but you don't have to. The reason I would worry about jump space lanes for prospective Starship buyers, not, well, FTL lanes, even when using a jump drive for prospective FTL users, jump drives are innately the riskiest of FTL types. They have the highest probability of failure if done non-standard. But they also, for a good one, doesn't require lanes, which can theoretically get you more distance, but jump drives are innately risky. If anything goes wrong, you're going to be probably in a bad way. And even then, FTL weather, quotation marks around weather, can have bad effects on jump drives, but also if you jump, you have to wait for your jump drive to recharge, while an FTL drive of a standard variety, you don't need to wait for it to recharge, but it takes longer to get from point to point. That'll all be covered in the lore video. Anyway. So, we're already not off to a good start on our, I suppose we've done a little bit of world building, but we're not really off to a good start on this. We've already had so many side tangents. Anyway. Basically, we will be working on here. They can't really move their jump gate further than the edge of their system, so it'll have to remain there. But I suppose they will increase their defenses of it, given all the new people coming through from civilized space. They'll regulate it. One other thing that needs to be covered is access rights in civilized space in regards to getting to the gate, given where it is compared to the other nations, which does make it difficult to get here for other nations, which is one of the reasons why there hasn't been a extremely large presence of other nations here. I mean, not every other, but a lot of other nations from civilized space have made it here with small expeditions and the like, but it's hard for a lot of the core nations to flood the area due to the location of the gate and the crumbling of the council. But that's all in regards to a lot of background stuff and lore in regards to the fall of the council, the rise of the systems authority, and all of that. Anyway. So we have a base, connection lanes and the like, so let's get to work. We know about the inner systems. We have actually information on the majority of the primary inner system, specifically actual system data of what's in them. But, of course, we can always get more detail. And that's what we're here for. I suppose the question is, do we want to work on outer systems? Actual frontier, outer controlled systems, mid-tier, inner mid-tier, or core? Of course, we still also need to finish off the sector map if we want, full ideal connections and the like. We also never finished figuring out what this little cluster's name is. We're going to make this little cluster, and it's going to have, I don't know, some sort of, not really a pun, but it literally looks like a music note. So an idea is to base sort of the sector name on some sort of music-related name for this cluster of systems. They're somewhat cut off with one entrance and one exit. which provides them a bit of political power, especially over here. Because if you want to get out here from, let's say, here, you want to get up here, I suppose you could go the long way, or you can go through there. But this, I assume, is some sort of independent, not completely independent. They're part of it, but, you know, relatively self-governing, independent nation here that controls some sort of sway, being defendable, and a potential route for goods and the like. Now, here's thoughts and the like that you have to throw out when world building. Not get rid of, but, you know, consider and the like. Trade from up here, likely things connect over here and the like. If it's going through here, instead of having to go along this line, which would take a lot longer, this is quicker. I mean, we can just see that. Watch. We're not really calculating for the most optimal of routes, but we're being relatively optimal in our transit. And you see, getting in to the core from here, we're at like 96 to get from there into there. So you're not going that way. Hello. And my apologies, we appear to have had a slight technical error. Hopefully it's been fixed. But yes, we had a slight technical error there. My apologies about that. Let's hope things are working again. Yes, sorry. Okay. Ideally, hopefully things are working. We'll keep going. It's hard to tell, but it appears things are working again. I don't know if anything was lost there, but as I was calculating, it is technically quicker to head up north than to go down through here. The entire point I was trying to make before that little technical error is this the route people are going to take to get in here? It is the quicker route, but we must consider, are there certain independent systems out here that are going to cause tariffs and trade and restrictions and the like? Is it better to head through here? What are the significant, these are things to consider, basically, when world building. Are there reasons you aren't going the fastest route? It's unlikely you're going to go the route that takes so much longer, but is there a reason to go through here rather than to go through here? Maybe they sell, these people buy and or sell goods that you can pick up or give here while getting here for a better profit. There might be multiple reasons to go, different ways to get places, even if they're slightly longer. Maybe this long chain has a lot more profit potential because it's a long chain where basically these inner systems, I say inner, I mean like of the line, the middle systems in the line, are less likely to get resources. Maybe there is a route that you want to take if you're not traveling here. Maybe there is a trade route you want to take that is the far longer way because there's more profit potential and trade potential there, going the long way. Or maybe there's resources that they sell for real cheap in here that you want to get to bring in. There's many reasons for these things that you might want to consider when world building and designing routes and so forth on something like this. This information does also apply to, well, not only space FTL routes, but also it can apply to medieval settings. For instance, instead of considering each purple square a, what's what I'm looking for? Of course, it would be set up slightly differently, but instead of considering each purple square a star system, consider it a town and or city. So let's say, why can't you get from here from there? There's a mountain range. So technically you could, but there's no real passage between the mountain range. So why take this route as opposed to this route? Well, maybe because there's more, like you can apply it to fantasy settings. Like, of course, there's differences and like that you would have to go over. Of course, it doesn't translate one-to-one because of the way FTL routes work as opposed to, you know, overland routes. But the point is the same overarching world-building principles can be applied in this in the same way they can be applied in a fantasy setting and vice versa, or a modern setting and all that. It goes over. It can apply in a variety of ways, basically. Let's see. So yeah, those are things to consider when working on such things. Of course, we still need to fill out the sector, as I keep saying. It needs work. Now, if you're wondering why these ones are in these squares, but not connected, it's not because distance-wise they couldn't be. They can. FTL routes can be rather long. But specifically, I believe it's within FTL route limits, but the reason isn't that. The reason these aren't connected are because we've decided basically that these ones don't connect to the system, the subsector themselves. They connect to other things that then maybe connect back to the subsector, or maybe not at all. Just because it's in the same subsector doesn't mean it needs to connect. It is separate, but it'll connect to the wider thing, more than likely. Now, if this was not a civilized area, I say civilized, of course, there's a bit of confusion in regards to civilized space being called civilized space and this being called the frontier, but technically this area is civilized enough that they don't really have unconnected systems. There are places in the galaxy with unconnected systems. There might even be unconnected systems in the wider sector that we're dealing with. Now, this one, if you're wondering why this one is empty except for one, is because in one of the campaigns, it was shown that there is a object here, but we didn't generate the rest of the sector or the connection lane, so that we know that there is an object there that connects in some way. But the point is, there are places that are absolutely unconnected or have lost connection to the wider network, which is one of the interesting things that we can do with FTL lanes. But yeah, there are things that can be disconnected from the network. For instance, there's no known route. There's no known route from civilized space all the way to here. There's no dedicated known route to get there. There might be a connected way to do so, but nobody knows. And theoretically, the explorer that generates that route, well, I say generates, but finds it, if it exists, will probably be, if they sell their data, rich. But theoretically, a FTL, the way it works is routes can also be generated. An explorer is likely not to generate a route. It costs so much. It's risky and costs so much money to even do so, to generate an FTL lane. So it's unlikely to have a independent explorer do it, but a nation could theoretically connect it if they had control over, etc., etc. And as the galaxy has been around, I say the galaxy, I mean like FTL itself, has been around for, we're about to, let me check my, instead of opening the big book on FTL and lore and background, I'll just quickly open our script for the FTL lore video that we're working on, because I have it written here. Here we are. So, about 7,000 or so years. Yeah. I don't have it written directly out, but I have it in the script noted, the years it took to get it. But basically, FTL started being discovered in 249658. And all major known nations, all major civilized space nations had it by 250869. It's currently 257, etc., etc., etc. So about 7,000 years ago, also, I believe, if I've done my math right, the number goes into the billions for its thing. So I haven't, I'd have to do a little bit more math and be accurate. But I believe about 7,000 years ago. So, and that's not counting the ancients who also generated FTL lanes, which some still remain. But in essence, basically, the point I'm making is it's been a long time since FTL was around. It's not like, when I say it was like discovered, it took several, like 1,000 and a bit more than a few thousand years for a bunch of major nations to get it. The principles of FTL aren't that complex, believe it or not. I mean, here, of course, for you Elysians out there in your alternate dimension, it is relatively difficult. For the laws of physics and so forth that we follow here, in our realm, it's actually rather simple. I mean, FTL can be powered by I believe you require a refined fusion drive? Now I have to find out. Luckily, that is listed in our Starship design chart, which I have right here because I was working on Starship design literally just the other day. Not in regards to their FTL engines, in regards to their subsystems and the like, specifically anti-missile arrays and modifications and all that fun stuff. We are always working on and improving Galactic Requiem. Here we are. Starship power systems. Yes. A TL-12 fusion... No, sorry. Yeah, no. TL12 is small miniaturized fission generators, advanced fission generators. While fusion generators are considered, well, non-Ulesians have lower tier. We're talking advanced, non-advanced fusion generators are tech level 14. Refined fusion generators are tech level 16. Refined fusion generators are exceptionally good. Of course, technically, you can get like fusion generators at around tech level 10. That's your Elysian tech level. They, at tech level 10, as you Elysians might know, given that you are currently tech level 10, you can somewhat make partially viable fusion generators that technically generate positive power, I guess, but not in any, it's still prototypes for you lot. Anyway, a refined fusion generator is required to power FTL. A refined fusion generator of the tech level 16 is required to provide FTL. And basically well, they're very advanced, and that's what you need. Of course, you could get better drives. That's the minimum requirement for FTL. Of course, there's antimatter reactors, singularity reactors, warped space reactors. There's even reactors that draw on other FTL space methods, so subspace, slipspace, hyperspace reactors, jump space reactors. You know how I said jump space is ultra dangerous? Yes. If you're wondering whether me stating that jump space in general is ultra dangerous, does that apply to jump space based reactors? Yes. Yes, it applies to jump space based reactors. However, if you're wondering what the benefits are, jump space reactors don't need refueling often. Advanced, as crazy as this, advanced refined fusion generators need refueling often. They need a lot of refueling. Jump space reactors don't. They also provide a lot more power output. They're also a lot more smaller, theoretically, depending on your tech. Admittedly, they're not smaller, but it really depends on your tech. You can theoretically power something larger with the smaller jump space reactor due to the power output, but the ability to build a small jump space reactor is not really there, if you understand what I mean. But basically, they also have let me put it this way, in simple terms, a refined fusion reactor has a 15% chance to detonate on the scale of a plasma-based weapon, a plasma-based heavy weapon, when destroyed. A jump space reactor has a 25% chance to detonate as a Class 7 heavy weapon when destroyed, which is far greater than a plasma-based heavy weapon. I believe that would be a 4 or a 3 tier heavy weapon, as opposed to a 7. So, like a lot more dangerous, a lot more unstable. Really depends on what tech you have and the like, of course. For instance, the jump space reactor isn't even really designable unless you have tech level 18 or can push your tech to 18, which a tech 16 can push their tech to 18 for special projects. So, But a jump space reactor technically does not need fuel. I mean, it has to be refueled, but you could, with a proper check, recharge a jump space reactor by shifting your ship into jump space, which is a risky maneuver. But theoretically, if your jump space reactor on a ship, you can do this. Of course, you can't do this if it's not connected to a jump capable device. But for a ship, you could recharge it by entering jump space. I suppose you could recharge the thing by making a sealed sector of jump space and a real space-based stationary device. I wouldn't recommend it. But, like, you know, it's let's not get into reactors. Point is, you need a advanced refined fusion generator. Well, just a refined fusion generator to enter FTL. Admittedly, I don't know how we got on this topic. Basically, there's just so much to be considered when working on all of this. So let's talk about our overall project here. Not the overall Galactic Requiem project, our world-building project. We have some information on Sacred Grove. The goal is to do what we've done with a few sectors. We've not never, we've rarely, I say not never to be fair, it's almost never. There are, I believe, a total of two and a half. Depends on your considerations on one of them. There are 2 full sectors. Like complete sectors. Not like every detail. When I say complete, let me explain. This, even if we mapped it out, there are many sectors that are fully mapped out, as you can see by the example sector here. It doesn't have its FTL lanes, but it's fully, every object is listed with its location. There are many systems like that. There are fewer that are fully mapped out with FTL lanes and fully mapped. There are two sectors in total, if I recall. There are many that are in various stages. There's lots like this. There's a lot like this, but with lanes, slightly less than there are fully mapped out. Fully mapped out with lanes, slightly less, but a lot of those. There are far fewer that are a full sector, fully mapped, with FTL lanes, with every single object of the average 500 to 1,500 objects listed, not just placed, listed like this. This one specifically, not its full details, of course, but with, you know, like what's in the system. Because when doing this, when running and the like, there are like 2 that are full lane and every object and all. But for instance, it's not like that's needed when running the game. Much as the great traveler saying is in the Traveler book, when designing world maps, map only as really necessary. That's their saying. When running a game, if it's taking place here, let's say a campaign's taking place in this area, it's not like, if a campaign's taking place, let's say, in this subcluster, we might need this, just this. If a campaign was taking place here, in this subsector, this entire subsector, what I would do is I would map this, everything around that subsector. I might, if I need to, be a bit nebulous And let's say there's this nation over here, and let's say it's not this, okay? We're giving an example of just a random sector, okay? Not specifically Sacred Grove. If we have something like this, we would map everything around it directly. Now, if there's nothing important here, I mean, if it's this close, what we do is we just map this out too, and then map this that might be tied to the plot, you know? But let's say there's nothing in between of relative importance, and there's another system here. We might map just this, we might map around there, so we have that and that. But I wouldn't consider that full. Even if there's nothing important and there's just minor nations and it's really not relevant, I wouldn't consider that full. What we need for the campaign is maybe the things around might be relevant. Even if it's just taking place here, maybe this is relevant. And we know that this is relevant. So we might make that, we might map the stuff around that, but we might just map that. And that's good enough, because everything else might not be relevant. Of course, if we know it's a full sector and there's multiple things at play, we might have to do more. But you map only as really necessary, as they say in travel. So that we have so many more things mapped like that, mapped only as really necessary. Then we have full maps, but you don't always need full maps. For instance, let's say the campaign is not taking place in this subsector. Let's say the campaign is taking place in this system. Then we could go here, but we don't necessarily need all that if it's literally only a system-based campaign and only things in the system are in regards. In which case, we might map the subsector, maybe the things around it, maybe, but all we really need is this. But we would map the subsector. Let's say it's taking place on a world. We might only map the system because it depends on the scale of the campaign. So we have a lot, basically, the majority of things are like that. The majority of things are mapped only what we need. And that is a good advice if you're world building for the sake of running a game, as opposed to building a world. Of course, we build worlds and run games. For instance, I don't limit my players in where they can go. I run an open world. So, if my players want to go here, I will map to there and do that. Normally, we don't use the bot, the GM bot that we use for solo. We normally don't use the GM bot. So, as the lead designer of Galactic Requiem and the like, when working on a campaign and so forth, or working on building a sector or the like, generally, I'll have an idea of the sector. For instance, I know that there are no major powers that interfere really outside of here. There's no major powers. There's small conglomerations of systems, but there's no major powers that are power players. If I make another sector, I might decide, hey, there's a big group of worlds here that are aligned, that are important. There's one here that's important. There's a nation that's split from them there. In between, that's important. Over down here, there might be some strife up here, and decide factions. Maybe I'll figure out that there's a faction over here that has interests and the like. So, these are things that can apply to a campaign, but it really depends on your tier. If we're playing a bunch of criminals that are bank robbers and are just robbing banks, then we don't need all that extra stuff. If we have a political campaign and the like, that might be relevant. It really depends on the campaign type. If our players are running a little store, it might not be relevant anything more than what's in their system. So a lot of things are generated that way. Just what's there and so forth and what's needed. So we only have two major systems sectors. I say systems, I mean sectors. I get confused in my terminology. We have two that are fully mapped, fully laned, with every single object at minimum, with details of what the primary star is and what's in the system orbiting that star and or stellar object. We have a lot more that are just fold and laned, and even more that are full like this. But by no means, even in civilized space, do we have every possible sector fully mapped, because it's a process. It's not like it's needed. But our plan for our world building here is this is an important sector. This is a very important sector to the frontier. Our plan, our goal, is to map this entire thing out, lane the entire thing, place everything to the degree, and make it basically the third fully, absolutely complete sector. Because as I said, it's not like you need complete sectors to run the game. You don't. Map only is really necessary. Only, like I said, if you have a campaign on in a subsector, you don't need the entire sector. That's so much more time and effort that you don't need, per se. You need the primary things involved in it. So, but yeah, so our plan is to fill out this, add all the stuff, and this is going to be a primary sector, or basically our third full, absolutely complete sector. That's our plan for our series. So in order to do that, of course, we won't bore you with the whole every aspect of it. I mean, this is, of course, world building. I mean, unless you really want every aspect of it, I suppose. But the primary goal here is to cover all the base world building aspects. We will work on individual worlds, design corporations, design factions, tie them together. All of that, more so than just like the goal, I say, is to make a full sector. But that's not all world building is about. We'll, of course, tie factions together, design a living sector, basically. And then we'll, of course, see where it goes. That's the great thing. If you design a living sector, you can work with it however you want. I mean, once more, even if you just generate this, you don't need a living sector, a full sector to have a living sector. If we have them there, this is important. We know there's a nation here. We can still decide, oh, they're going to conquer some smaller nations here. A small alliance of smaller nations here are going to try and do, like, you can still do that, even without a full map. It's not like it's needed, but it's nice. So, Anyway, that will be our primary thing to work on. But I suppose we'll get to it then. We have had a bit of rambling, but I believe we've done good at laying out our plans. We've made a plan of action. We've set our goals. We've explained a few things. It's rambly, but it's a bit less rambly than usual, so we're in the right direction. Of course, eventually we'll get deep into the world building, but I mean, it's good to set a basic outline for it and how it's going to go. So, now, admittedly, we still, like I said, we still have other things to work on, but even just looking at this, it brings up ideas, at least to me. It may look like chaos and randomness, but as I said in regards to like trade lanes and the like, and what we know about the system being that it's not super unified, I say system, I mean sector once more, and the Sacred Grove Nation. one question we need to ask and answer is every grouping individual or not? Obviously, this is dependent. Of course, not every grouping is individual, but is this, for instance, there's one way in, one way out. There might be another way down here leading to, because we haven't done it yet, but this looks like an independent thing. Maybe they're tied here, and this is a block or something. We know for a fact that this is. We know for a fact from our previous campaign that this is an independent little group. We know because we decided that this is. Is this an alliance? I mean, just because they're a separate thing with a blockade does not necessarily, I say blockade, but one way in and out does not mean that it's necessarily a unified group. It does make it easier for a unified group to form and set a barrier or area of control, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's true. We could have this be an alliance all the way along here that splits and locks across these three, meaning there's problems because basically like what? These is one nation up here, and this is another here, causing some trouble. There's two lanes here, there's a lane leading there. I mean, it might not even be trouble. They might be allies, they might be adversaries, there might be disputes. Even allies can have disputes in regards to trade and control of borders and the like. There's all sorts we can do in regards with that. Just because it's a cut off section doesn't mean it's unified. Like, there's so much we can do with that, and these are things we need to consider when deciding. And to me, looking at just the chaos of it does provide issues and ideas in regards to that. There's a lot to work on in regards to the actual design. So let's lay down some ground rules. There is no, while they are relatively independent, due to the amount of control, there is no direct split between star systems in the core. They might have disagreements and the like, but they're not proclaiming independent units. There are independent proclamations within each Dyson swarm, of course, but there's no independent, like, this is our territory within the inner systems. This will remain the fact all the way out to there, to the basically border of their mid-tier systems. That's not to say that there aren't little groups or alliances or the like, but there are no independent claims outside of the mid-tier systems. And we will quickly take note of that. So zoomed out that it's hard to see. Here we are. No independent nations. Inside its core. No independent nations, I should specify. Claiming several systems area inside its core or mid-tier influence zone. Basically indicating what we just described. They don't have separate things within that influence zone. We should specify slightly better one thing. There are, however, alliances, groups, and what's the word I'm looking for? Alliance, group, and we'll just go alliances and groups. They exist, they're just not proclaiming independence from the government, basically. Not heavy independence, I mean like they're not self-governed to a degree like that. So that's within there. That's going to be one of our base rules. It's not common here either. It happens in the outermost sphere, but it's not common. For instance, this is one of them. This might be one of them, maybe, etc. We know that the outer sphere, from previous campaigns, the outer sphere of control has many single systems. Claiming independence. We also know that Sacred Grove, I don't know how to put this in good, like, written out terms off the top of my head. This is more so an overarching fact than a detail, basically. Sacred Grove, which has been and is expanding its outermost zone. I don't know how to put this in good terms. They have had and will have. I don't know how to put it. Basically, in simple terms, Sacred Grove, the outer sphere of influence is constantly expanding. Slowly, but it is. Like, it takes time to colonize and all that. But basically, they are a growing power. Like I said, they have influence out here, but this is technically the edge of their border. Like, loosely. Like, technically. They are expanding-ish. Slowly, over a lot of time. When I say slowly over a lot of time, I mean like years and years and years. Dozens, if not hundreds of years, they will expand further out. It's risky, as there aren't a lot of major players out there, but there's a lot of, it's not like there's not a lot of civilized systems out here. There are nations and the like, and Sacred Grove isn't stable, as I think well, as I sort of explained, they're very much not stable. They're a big power, but they have a lot of interior trouble. They're not anywhere near as unified as other nations with Dyson swarms. They don't have a lot of ability to throw out power to expand, and this is causing trouble. The entire reason the outer systems are the outer systems, I say this is part of the law that's been established, basically. They have, how do you put this? They have a sort of, the people out here are very independent. They've moved out to the borders to sort of establish territories in these outer worlds. Some of them are civilized, some of them are not, like territory-wise. When I say that, I mean like, I believe the correct word is, some of these worlds out here, systems, are highly populated, some are not. But lots of people out here feel that they're escaping. I say escaping, but you know, like leaving the more civilized core of Sacred Grove. They don't necessarily want to. And those, but they won't want to leave Sacred Grove, but they don't want to be stuck in the core of Sacred Grove, you know? They want to live on the outskirts, have their own sort of ways of it. While these people usually want nothing to do with Sacred Grove, these people who sort of want, but don't necessarily, want to stay. It's a bit of a problem, you know? People want to head out and have more territory and land and so forth. So does Sacred Grove, but they don't want to intrude upon, and there's just lots of things going on in regards to that, which is eventually going to be a problem for Sacred Grove. I say a problem. It's not going to be a problem for Sacred Grove, really. It could cause troubles, but basically, there's no way to stop Sacred Grove. For instance, if I open my file here, to the north of, this is the nearby sectors. We have notes here on what the nearby sectors contain. To the north are scattered minor and mid-tier civilizations to the sectors up north. Up here. Directly north are minor and mid-tier civilizations. To the direct east are, to the north are scattered minor and mid-tier civilizations, not all packed together, just scattered around relatively loosely. To the east are many more closely packed minor and mid-tier civilizations. To the south are scattered minor and mid-tier civilizations. Directly west is mostly empty of civilizations, and there's lots of pirates and so forth over directly to the sectors directly west of here. To the southeast are scattered minor and mid-tier civilizations. To the west, southwest, is mostly empty and unexplored, very much empty and unexplored. To the northeast are many minor and mid-tier civilizations. To the northwest is scattered minor and mid-tier civilizations. There's more to it than that. That's just the rough statement of the amount of civilization in those areas. To the distant south, southeast are scattered minor and mid-tier civilizations, but those are to the distant south, southeast. Basically, that's just what's there loosely. Of course, I have other notes here in regards to if there are any, here, where is it? There is trade with several corporations in some of those, specifically the closest, larger scale ones. The more scattered ones, there's not really as much trade, and there's very little heading to the pirate section. Not to say that there's not trade there, there's not major trade routes with agreements there. But basically just an overview of what's around in regards. But it's not like any of those nations stand a chance. Not against the Dyson Swarm. The only thing really stopping Sacred Grove from fully taking over a lot of this area with the amount of everything they have is the fact that they are so loosely held together. The fact that so many of their sub-factions and so forth are just so very loosely held together is what prevents Sacred Grove from doing so. But even then, they have enough power to theoretically take over everything, even scattered the way they are, which is dangerous for everyone else, assuming they ever wished to. It would cause a lot of problems for everybody because it's not like anybody could stop them, but also it would not be ideal. Given the fact that the other people around generally don't like Sacred Grove. I say don't like, but, from an expansion and sending their forces out to their territories sort of thing, with their Sacred Grove military forces and the like just being around, it would be bad for Sacred Grove. They could handle it, but it would, if they did not have internal political trouble and took all the stuff, the amount of, well, just rebellion and things that would occur in the conquered territories would be just not worth it for them. So great that it's just not worth it. They wouldn't want to, dealing with retaliatory strikes, people destroying their infrastructure, all of that in their conquered territories, in addition to their internal strife. What if they bring that to the Dyson Swarm? That would just cause even more internal strife, let alone in the territories they conquer. They could handle it. It's just not ideal, and it's not like they gain anything from it. Other than territory, I suppose. But they're still literally producing additional Dyson swarms in the core. They're still producing those. They're still colonizing here. They're still colonizing there. They're still loosely expanding slightly. There's no need for them. They have a Dyson swarm that is capable of star lifting to a degree. Star lifting is drawing resources out of a star. And they have multiple Dyson swarms being constructed. They don't need resources. They don't need to conquer planets for resources. They don't need to conquer planets for population. They don't need any of that. That's the thing about a Dyson swarm. If you have a Dyson swarm, you can expand, but if your Dyson swarm is reasonable and so forth, it's not like you need a lot more. I must resist the urge to go on a tangent. But yeah, basically that's a lot of that. They don't need a lot of, it's not like they need territory. Just build more Dyson Swarm stations. It's not like they need resources. Starlift. It's not like they need any of that stuff, technically speaking. Of course, there are those who want more regardless. There are people who want to not live in a Dyson Swarm. There's all that. Although I'm not sure why you would want to not live in a Dyson Swarm. There's absolutely nothing wrong with living in a Dyson Swarm station. You can make a spin gravity station. Well, we have artificial gravity, of course, but we also have non-artificial gravity. We even have zero gravity, but there's no reason not to live in a Dyson swarm. The stations can have spin gravity and you can have a forest station. You can have O'Neill cylinders or McKendree cylinders, I believe it is. And if you have one of the larger varieties, you basically have a planet's worth of space, and you can make it look all planet-like with forests and cities. You can make it the same as a well, obviously, there are differences, but basically, almost the exact same as a planet. Why would you want to take a planet when you can live in the safety of a station that can move or do any of that? A station is debatably safer than a planet, debatably. There's really no reason not to. Of course, we have all sorts of megastructures available. Like I said, we have O'Neill cylinders, which isn't really a megastructure, at least not in our standards. A McKendree cylinder, we might consider a large McKendree cylinder a megastructure. I'm willing to consider a McKendree cylinder a megastructure. But we have, of course, Banks orbitals. We have... Sorry? I forget. I am not able to name every single megastructure off the top of my head. Where is it? We will find it. One more second. Where did I put that file? Okay. Here we go. Okay. So, apparently it wasn't even open, which is why. So, it says here, let's see some of our megastructures. Yep. McKendree cylinders. Bishop rings. Banks orbitals. Of course, there are Ecumenopolises. Ecumenopolises? Yes. But those are more... I mean, I suppose you might consider those megastructures. Ecumenopolis, for those of you who don't know, is basically a world city. Well, a planet covered in city, for the most part. Banks orbitals, bishop rings, full-on ring worlds, Dyson swarms, Dyson spheres, and more. Of course, there's also fun structures for nation building. As I think I've said before, we have an entire set of rules for running and constructing nations and all the things in them. And so for that, of course, we have all sorts of fun structures. Let's see. Here we are. Star lifting structures, Matryoshka brains, full-on artificial star construction, artificial planet construction, stellar thrusters, planetary thrusters. Multiple ring worlds. Smaller things, such as plain old space elevators. Everybody loves a good space elevator. orbital rings, which are like ring worlds, except they're sort of more in orbit around a planet, circling a planet. Power satellites, launch loops, space fountains and space towers, mass driver launchers, sky hooks, all sorts of good stuff. Of course, all variants of terraforming. Basically, in Galactic Requiem, if you have the tech available to do it quickly, you can do it a lot quicker, but pretty much any tech level, assuming you have space capability, can start terraforming to a degree. And there's a variety of different terraforming options to basically, if you have a system, you can turn most planets into any other type, loosely speaking. Of course, it doesn't always work. I mean, there's all sorts of, variables. You can heat worlds, cool worlds, all sorts of stuff. Add water to worlds. Depends on the world, of course. Artificial orbital mirrors. FTL gates, FTL lane generation. Of course, space stations, military platforms, anything, basically. And that's the great thing about Galactic Requiem, our framework of designing any sort of structure, and the fact that with a little bit of work, we can pretty much work on it all. And that's what we do. Of course, there are certain projects that are constantly a problem due to the fact that we've decided to run Galactic Requiem long ago. It's not just decided, it's been literally forever. But D20, as I'm sure for those of you who know our solo things, it's D20 based. Old 3.5 modified, of course, heavily. Modified more so than like Pathfinder's 3.75. I'd hardly call Pathfinder modified, honestly. But that's just personal opinion from, but, old school 3.5 because, back in my day, we primarily ran 3.5 and that was 3.0 to 3.5. 3.5 is just a modification of 3.0, to be fair. And, I mean, that's just primarily what we used to use back in the day. And just the fact that 3.0 or 3.x, if you will, because literally 3.0 to 3.75 to all the variants and so many variants are basically what we used because of 3.x was, in my opinion, the best of D20. Because even if there was something you didn't like, you could likely find a reasonable modification from any one of the I was going to say thousands, and then thought, no, it's not thousands. Then, no, it is thousands. Any one of the thousands of both official or unofficial, not thousands of both, but there's thousands if you count unofficial, but there's hundreds of official variants, modifications, differences, everything basically loosely designed around 3.x of D20 that is just, that's why it's my favorite. There's so much, and it was, sure, there was some complexities, but 3.x just the way, because 3.x, for those of you who don't know, is when they added, I think it's when they added the OGL, Open Gaming License, which basically opened the floodgates for so many amazing semi-official and custom and homebrew things for D20. There's, how do I put this? There's D20 3.x Starship Troopers. There's D20 3.x, like official D20 3.x Starship Troopers. Official Starship Troopers. There's D20 3.x, like, the entirety of Spycraft is basically D20 3.x heavily modified is basically all of Spycraft. There's obviously heavily modified, but it's, if you know Spycraft and Spycraft 2, it is basically heavily modified 3.x. There's also, let's see, there's unofficial things. Don't get me started. There's so much unofficial things. There's that are modified to a variety of degrees. There's 3.x aliens. There's 3.x so many different campaign settings for 3.x. Pathfinder is a modification of 3.x. There's just so much in regards to it, which is why we've gone with D20 3.x as a base, heavily modified, but as a base for Galactic Requiem. And basically, there are benefits to that, but also downsides that we're constantly trying to iron out. For instance, as far as I've seen, of course, given the sheer amount of options out there available, and homebrews and official stuff, and just everything out there of 3.x, I have not seen it all. But, I mean, look, there's 3.x official 3.x Call of Cthulhu. There's 3.x Mass Effect, unofficial. There's 3.x Stargate, if you count Spycraft as 3.x, which it basically is. There's official Spycraft variant. It's Spycraft licensed out, I believe, for official Stargate. So there's Spycraft Stargate, which is still, if you know the system, basically absolutely based on 3.x. So Stargate 3.x. Like, there is so much official and unofficial of it, like, out there. But there's nothing I've seen so far that does vehicles well. I don't know what to say. I just haven't seen vehicles done well. If you ask me, D&D, official D&D, 3.x, of course, I'm not only ever, but whenever I'm talking about rules like this, assume, unless I specify otherwise about anything, usually, unless I'm specifying otherwise, I mean 3.x as my reference frame for things. Of course, I've seen other systems. Of course, I've played Eclipse Phase. I've played so many other tabletop RPGs. I'm not going to go over my entire list of books and see which ones I have and haven't. I've played so many other types that aren't 3.x specifically. But my entire point is, for reference, I just usually, when I say these things, I mean 3.x. D&D and Pathfinder, in my opinion, do vehicles absolutely shit. Terrible vehicle system. Spycraft has some interesting ideas in regards to how it works, but it's still not ideal for vehicles. D20 Modern, not ideal for vehicles. D20 Modern is 3.0. It's 3.x variant. It's weird. The era that it comes out in is weird. It feels... So, for those of you who know 3.x, you're most likely familiar with 3.5. D20 Modern is great. It has problems. It's what a lot of our base stuff is similar to, but of course heavily modified. There's certain problems with D20 Modern. But they do vehicles slightly better, in my opinion, than D&D and Pathfinder, but still do them terrible. Like I said, Spycraft, in my opinion, does them terrible. Everything I've seen does vehicles terribly. The problem, D20 Modern's weird. It feels, for those of you familiar with 3.5, as I was saying before I got sidetracked, D20 Modern feels like they built it off of 3.0, not 3.5. It's weird that way. I'm not sure. I haven't looked into the design of it or the background of when they designed it or so forth. I don't know off the top of my head the dates they started making them and so forth. But D20 Modern feels like they designed it on a base of 3.0, not 3.5, which is just weird to me. I mean, like I said, I'm familiar with 3.0 and 3.5, but I'm more used to 3.5 because that's what anybody who does D&D in the 3-point era is used to. You probably, I say that as a blanket statement, but to be fair, I don't mean it as a, of course, there are those of you out there who've done 3.0 more than 3.5. You probably exist, probably, but it's just more likely that if you are familiar with the 3.x era, you're probably more familiar with 3.5 or Pathfinder than 3.0. Because there's just the sheer amount of 3.5 compared to 3.0. But yeah, that's that causes problems because I just have never been able to find a good vehicle solution. Of course, our practically completely custom Starship system works perfectly. I say perfectly, not perfectly. It works. I would never say perfectly. I'm so bold to have done that. No, nowhere near perfectly. But our Starship system works statistically. The problem doesn't arise there. Now, that's not to say that I'm not trying to be like, wow, how could they not design a good vehicle system? I've designed a perfectly fine Starships. No, 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 no. I fully understand the problem. If it were so simple, seeing as I heavily basically designed a Starship system, you think, well, then why don't you just design a system that works or edit a system that works for vehicles? Because there's inherent problems in it for the sake of things. I suppose this is a bit of a tangent, but in our system, we have injuries and wounds and the like. You can shoot a person in the arm and damage their arm, and that will provide penalties and the like. You can shoot a vehicle's engine block out. We have locational damage on vehicles. We have locational damage on most things, including starships and vehicles and all that. But just the innate hit point nature of it causes problems in regards to vehicles. There are innate problems involved that I've just never been able to solve. I'm sure I mean, someone could and so forth. It's a lot of, it's complex. But there's that, because I mean, technically, let's put it this way. Your average car has a damage reduction of 5. A pistol does 2d6 damage, meaning its average is going to be 7. I actually rolled 7 right there. 5 and a 2. But yeah, the average of 2d6 is 7 also. So you're going to do 2 damage to a car. If I shoot a car in the door, straight across, door to door, what is the likelihood? Okay, a car in modern has what? 28 to 30 8 health, give or take. If I shoot a car in the door, I'm doing 2 damage to a car, shooting a car. I'm shooting it through the door. 7, 5, 2, right through the door. Now, a pistol round will probably, there are certain dependents, variables, all that. More than likely, your pistol round's going to go through the car door. It's going to go through both doors, more than likely. Depending on what the car's made out of and so forth. Modern Elysian cars can go through the car doors. I can fire at that car through the door all day. Let's bring up a calculator because I don't feel like doing math in my head. We're doing 2 damage. Car has 30 HP. We'll just say 30, give or take, because that's roughly the actual average. Not average, but it's close enough to what the stats give for some variants of cars. We can shoot a car 15 times, door to door. The car will be disabled via the rules on vehicles. We've shot the car through the door. What part of the car is so vital in the door that the car's gonna stop working? You can remove all the doors in a car and it'll still go. So why is that? It's an innate problem of hit points. To be fair, there are not only in D20 or 3.x, many systems have this problem. And there's no easy solution to it. You just have to assume, as the GM, you need to do your GM job and assume that they're hitting the car in relatively important places if they're trying to shoot at the car. If somebody says, I want to shoot through the car's door, to the other door, well, I mean, if there's somebody in there, they're going to get shot. But if there's not somebody in there, what you're going to have to realize and do your job as a GM and say, basically, this does not damage the car as a whole. We have a somewhat solution for that in the case that we actually separate vehicles into parts and we consider that a blow to the chassis or passenger compartment, which can be removed with its own HP and does not destroy the car as a total the way we do it, which I suppose is a partial solution, but it's still weird in the way it's done. I mean, hit points add some strangeness to the way things are done in that way. There's also the other problem we face constantly in designing Galactic Requiem, which is levels are weird. I don't like them. They're weird. Same with the way skill and ability and all that. Skills are fine. We have a custom-ish, spycraft-ish skill system. That's fine. It's perfectly fine. I actually find it ideal. However, the way the entire health and skill and feat and everything tie into levels is, in my opinion, just not ideal. There are systems that do it better. But the way we've done it, we're sort of stuck unless we want to rewrite a lot of things in order to get it to work. Because I'm not a fan of levels, strangely enough. I mean, I'm a fan of skill and the way levels provide, what they are a tool that helps things work. They are not ideal to what I seek, which is to simulate a world, as we've always said here at Galactic Requiem. Why is this person level 4 and this person level 20? If this person is level 20 and they're an office worker, why the hell is the defense score so high? They're an office worker and this is a level 1 soldier, level 20 office worker. Why is that office worker's AC so high? It's not good. It's not good. Hell, that level 1 soldier has a worse shooting ability than that level 20 office worker, despite the office worker never holding a gun. Even with the feats that are like, you don't have a gun using feat, that's a -4. Still, better shot than the soldier? It, it, it's not ideal. And there are problems with it, and that so many times I've considered just removing it or editing it, and there's entire problems. We're stuck with those, but, you know, that's the way it goes. So that's something we have to consider. I'm constantly considering changing it. Constantly. There are systems. They're far more complex, though. There are solutions, but they're complex. For instance, the primary, this is really off topic. The primary idea that I've come up with, for the most part, is treating it like a lot more of other systems. How do I put it? A lot more like Cyberpunk or Traveler or things like that, in which, if you don't know, experience-wise, you put your points into certain things. When you gain things, also Eclipse Phase does it this way. Eclipse Phase does it this way too. There are many that do it this way. I just can't think of all of them off the top of my head. There are many I know of that do it this way. But basically, you get your experience or whatever you want to call the points, and you put it in certain things. So you can pour your training or so forth into certain things, which is far more ideal than, oh, I'm now a new level. Despite being an office worker who's never held a gun in my life, I'm now better at shooting than it. It makes it better to, I suppose, in my it this is it's a complex topic. I could just change it, but to that, because we have a system for it, which is basically all the base things, I've already come up with a system where all the base upgrades theoretically you could get are split into topics. They're split into categories: defense, attack, BAB, etc. You know, all split into separate things that you can theoretically put your points in to upgrade as opposed to overall, which I suppose, that sounds like a good solution, at least theoretically. I mean, it's the way other things have done it. And it sounds like a good solution, except for when you consider the fact that we do have classes. So does that make classes irrelevant? Because we already have a class system. So in which case, do we get rid of all the classes? Do we keep the classes as just a framework for the abilities? Because now, if we do it that way, the BAB, RAB, will saves, fort saves, reflex saves, all that has become irrelevant to the class. So what do you do with that? Do you just remove those? It causes, like, as you can see, it seems like a simple solution. Just get rid of that and make it purchasable. Okay, well then what do we do with classes? How do you determine such things at that point? And it spirals out like that into complexities, and it basically, yeah. Anyway, we've gone off topic. We'll call it there this time. Next time, we'll continue on Friday. We'll continue our solo. We might try and play a game on Sunday. And then next time on Worldbuilding Wednesday, we'll actually start working on the world building. Now that we've let out a framework and an idea for it, we'll start actually working on it. I am going to go get coffee and have some food. So, and then attend to some imperial business and the like. So I hope you enjoyed. Hopefully we'll get more and more into direct world building, which is what the plan has been. So hopefully we can get more direct in our world building and the like and less rambly. I think we did relatively better at it this time. So look forward to that next World Building Wednesday. Next Friday, we will play the solo campaign. And on Solo Sunday, if we have time, we will play the game. A game. Some game. Probably Endless Sky. So thank you all for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed and have a good day.